Okay, so what we're going over today, okay, differences between plant and animal cells, similarities between plant and animal cells, and we're also going to label our diagrams of the cell. Now I will apologize in advance because I am going to have to give you black and white copies. I will give you color copies as soon as they fix the color printer. When I went to print them, there were 10 jobs in the school ahead of me. Something's blocking it, so they wouldn't print it. Okay, but I'll give you black and white ones. You can label those today, and then I'll give you color ones as soon as I can. And you can transfer the labels over. Okay, so we got to know and understand how plant and animal cells are different. We have to understand why those differences are present and necessary, and then obviously be able to correctly label plant and animal cells. Okay, so why do you suppose plant cells and animal cells have differences? What do they do differently?
One uses photosynthesis and the one gains its energy from eating real substances, like meat and vegetation.
Yeah, that is exactly why they have differences. Okay? Their modes of nutrition, that is where they get their energy from, are different. And you require different structures to carry out those processes. Okay? If you are going to be photosynthetic, then you have to have little structures or organelles that contain chlorophyll so that you can carry out photosynthesis. If you are a type of organism that consumes other organisms for food, then you have to have the parts of the cell that will help you to digest and break down the organic material that is present in other organisms. Okay? So that's the main reason why there are structural differences between plant cells and animal cells. And of course, there's more than just plants and animals. There's also fungi, whose cells are kind of a cross between both. Okay? How does a fungus get its energy? Where do you typically see fungi growing? Sometimes they grow on plants. Usually they grow on things that are
Like moist and wet.
okay, those are the conditions. Yeah, they would definitely need moist or wet conditions. Okay. You ever leave bread in the pantry too long? What starts to grow on it? Mold. Mold is a fungus. Okay. Fungi grow on other organisms, be they alive or dead. Okay, fungi will consume organic material. This was actually a big mistake for a very long time, okay, for biology. Fungi were actually placed in the plant kingdom for a very long time, which is totally wrong, because the defining characteristic of a plant is the use of photosynthesis to produce energy. Fungi are not photosynthetic. Fungi get their energy in the same way you and I do. They digest organic material, right? Some fungi live on dead stuff, okay? And they break down and help to decompose dead material, plants and animals, stuff like that. That's why fungi grows on spoiled food. Okay? Spoiled food is full of organic material, right? So you see mold growing on bread, okay? If you've ever seen like an orange, okay, if you leave it too long, it gets that kind of greenish white stuff growing on it, okay? That is actually Penicillium fungus. It's the fungi from which penicillin was isolated. Okay? In one of those strange discoveries, a person noticed that when that fungus would grow on fruit, bacteria would not. Okay? If that fungus got there first, no bacteria would grow. So we figured there must be something in this fungus that prevents the growth of bacteria, an antibiotic, okay? Which then became penicillin, the most commonly used antibiotic. Okay? And there's obviously derivatives of that now. Right? So fungi consume other organisms for food. Okay? Most of them are decomposers. That is, that they consume stuff that's already dead. Some of them are parasitic, like athlete's foot. Okay? Athlete's foot is a fungus. It grows on your skin. Okay? And it's itchy. And it's itchy because it's eating you. That's why it's itchy. Okay? So fungi they digest their food externally and then absorb it. So exactly the same chemical process that goes on in your stomach, okay? Stomach acid and enzymes that digest your food, fungi do externally. So they grow these things, they look like roots, but they're called hyphae, and they grow them into the material that they're eating, be it your feet or organic material on the ground. Okay? And they secrete enzymes, which digests the material around them, and then they absorb that. That's what makes your feet itchy when you have athlete's foot fungus. It's actually digesting you. Okay? It's eating you, it's using you for food. Okay? So you definitely want to like stop that. Okay? You want to kill the athlete's foot fungus. Okay? Not that it would like ever eat you completely, but if you were immune suppressed, it can be actually pretty dangerous because your immune system usually keeps it at bay. But if you're immune suppressed for any reason, it can kind of get going and like start showing up as like lesions and stuff. Okay? There's also fungus grows on your scalp, causes dandruff. How many of you really badly want to scratch your head right now? I do these things to mess with people, but it's true, actually. Okay? All right, so there's different modes of nutrition. Some organisms are what we call chemoheterotrophs. That is that they consume the organic material or chemicals from other organisms. And some things are photoautotrophs, meaning they can feed themselves using light. Okay, so those are the two types of nutrition that we're going to be going over, okay, and that is the main difference between plants and animals. Okay, so lots of subtle differences between plant and animal cells, and it's the different modes of nutrition where the biggest differences occur. Right, so obviously, if you're a lion, you eat wildebeests and other things that you hunt. Okay, and if you're a tomato plant, you sit in the sun and make your own food. Okay, so animals are chemoheterotrophs. That word is important, that's why it is underlined, so make sure that you highlight it. Okay, chemoheterotroph means chemical other feeder. In other words, the organic material from other organisms. Okay, so that could be an earthworm eating like humus in the dirt. Okay. It could be a mushroom that is decomposing, a fallen tree. Okay, or your foot, okay? Or it could be a great white shark that's trying to eat you, okay? So there's all kinds of different types of chemoheterotrophs, but in the end, what they all share is they digest or break down complex organic molecules and release their energy. So basically, we have to get anything we eat turned into sugar so that we can burn it for energy. Okay? We can use protein for energy, but it's difficult. Okay? That's why so many like weight loss plans want you to eat lots of protein as opposed to carbohydrates, because proteins are harder for your body to break down and they actually give you less overall energy than an equal amount of carbs would. Okay? So we have to have these enzymes basically that can break stuff down so that we can use it for energy. Okay. So, since we need those enzymes, we need a part of our cell that has them or makes them. Okay. And that would be the lysosome. So all animal and fungus cells, okay, as well as lots of protists like an amoeba or a paramecium, okay, will have lysosomes in their cells. Okay. The lysosome is basically the cell's stomach. There are lots of lysosomes in any one cell. Okay. They all contain digestive enzymes and help to break down the organic material that is absorbed by the cell. Okay. Everybody all right with that? Okay, so animal cells have to be somewhat plastic. Okay, and I don't mean they're actually made out of plastic. I mean plastic means like they can change their shape or they can have their shape be whatever they need it to be. Right? So an animal cell needs to be flexible and able to change shape. Okay? The reason for that is it's going to be in an organism that's going to have to move around because it's going to have to chase down its food. Okay? Even if it's a cow, it still has to move around. I mean, yeah, you don't have to chase grass, but you still have to move around because you eat all the grass in one place. You have to go somewhere else. Okay? So animals, regardless of whether they're carnivorous, herbivorous, or omnivorous, must move around, so their cells need to be flexible. Does a fungus need to have flexible cells? They actually don't, and they have a cell wall, believe it or not. Okay? Fungi are very different from animals. They're also very different from plants. Okay? They have cell walls like a plant cell, but they digest food for energy, unlike plants. Okay? And the cell walls of a fungus are made of the same material as the exoskeleton of a bug. Okay? That hard, chitinous material. Okay? It's actually similar to what your fingernails and hair are made out of. Okay? Same material made outside of bugs. Okay? All right, so they've got to have that. Now, for animals though, that's what we're concerned with. They've got to have flexible cells. That means no cell wall, but a flexible cell membrane that allows materials in and out. Okay? So they're going to have the lysosomes, they're going to have the flexible cell membrane, and they're also going to have centrioles, which are oddly enough not on this diagram. Okay? And the centrioles help them when their cells are dividing, because their cells could change shape in the middle of division, and we'll get to that in a minute. Okay? Okay? If you are a photoautotroph, photo means light, auto means self, troph means feeding. So these are light self-feeding, so they are photosynthetic organisms. Okay? So plant cells produce their own food by capturing sunlight and using its power to remove carbon from carbon dioxide to produce sugar for energy by photosynthesis. Okay. Now, how many people have seen the carbon cycle before? Okay. Should have seen that in like junior high science. Okay, the carbon cycles. Animals produce carbon dioxide, and then plants use the carbon dioxide for photosynthesis and make oxygen, and it goes back and forth. Okay, it's actually more complex than that, and we've looked at it in this course already. Okay, photosynthesis as a chemical reaction looks like this. Okay. And of course, we would have to balance that, so there would be 2 here. Sorry, not a 2 there, 2 over there. 12, 24. 12. 12 and 24 is 36. 12 there, I think that's about right. Okay, so that's the chemical reaction for photosynthesis. What does it kind of look like?
Reverse combustion.
Right, it's a combustion reaction in reverse. I mean, think about it. When you burn a tree in fire, like in a campfire, you're burning a piece of tree. You're basically undoing all the photosynthesis by a combustion reaction, which is why what happens in our cells, cellular respiration, is the opposite. Okay, so animals produce the raw materials for plants, and vice versa. Okay? When plants carry out this process, they make oxygen, which obviously we need to breathe, but they also make glucose, sugar. Well, that sugar can be incorporated into different things and made into starches and all kinds of stuff that the plant would use to grow. Okay? And then if something comes along and eats the plant, well, it's going to digest or break down that glucose using oxygen, releasing carbon dioxide and water. Okay? So that's what's going on, photoautotrophs and chemoheterotrophs. Photoautotrophs do this, that's photosynthesis. Chemoheterotrophs do this, that's cellular respiration. Okay, so for plants to be photoautotrophs, carry out photosynthesis, they have to have specialized organelles. Now that term, organelles, that's basically a structure within the cell, or a cell organ. Organelle. Okay, we have organs, they're big, they're made of many cells. A cell has little organs, organelles. Okay, and the specialized organelles are called chloroplasts. They are what makes a plant green, basically. Okay? Inside the chloroplast are basically all of the photosynthetic pigments, mostly chlorophyll, but there are others. Okay? So they've got these kind of oval-shaped organelles that are full of what look like stacks of like coins or like poker chips or whatever. They kind of just look like stacks of those. That is where the chlorophyll is stored. That is where the energy capturing part of photosynthesis takes place, okay, where it captures the sunlight and uses it to break down the carbon dioxide and oxygen and make glucose. Okay? So you're going to see lots of those. When we do our cell anatomy lab and we actually look at plant cells, you'll see organelles, you'll see the chloroplasts very clearly. They're quite large and numerous in the cells that we'll be looking at, so you'll be able to see them pretty easily. Okay? They also have to have very stiff cell walls. Okay? A plant supports itself in two ways. Okay? Cell walls, okay, which are fairly strong. They're made of a fiber called cellulose. Okay? That's dietary fiber, by the way. Okay? So if anyone's like mom or dad, or maybe you eat take Metamucil. Okay? Metamucil keeps you regular. Okay? It's got fiber in it. It's basically got psyllium fiber, which is the fiber from different types of grains. Okay? And we can't break that down. Okay? Like when we eat salad or celery or any other like vegetable, okay, we get a lot of fiber out of it, dietary fiber that we cannot digest. So it goes through us kind of unchanged. Okay, so yeah, you eat it and it comes out looking kind of the same as it went in. Think corn. Okay, corn's got lots of cellulose in it. I know it's kind of gross, but okay, we can't digest that stuff. Okay, herbivores can. So if we fed that stuff to a cow or a pig, okay, they would be able to digest it because they have a different digestive system than we do. And so they can actually digest that stuff. All right, so they have these cell walls that are made of cellulose fiber. It's pretty strong. Okay? And they have these big water vacuoles. Okay? And the water vacuoles fill up with water, and they're like a balloon. Okay? When a balloon is full, even if it's full of water, not air, it becomes quite stiff, quite rigid. You don't change its shape nearly as easily. So that exerts pressure on the cell from the inside, pushes against the cell wall, reinforcing the cell wall and keeping it stiff. Okay? And that's how a plant that's not a woody plant, so a green plant, like those ones, okay, can support itself. A giant tree, that's different. Okay? Wood is made of different materials, and we'll get to that when we talk about plants. But typically just the leafy parts of plants are supported by those two things, the cell wall and the water vacuoles. Now, if you don't water a plant for a while, before it dies, what does it do? Yeah, it shrinks or wilts, right? It gets limp. Okay? That's because the water has been pulled from the vacuoles, and they're no longer pushing against the cell walls. The cell walls by themselves are not strong enough to support the plant. Okay? They need the help from the water vacuole. So when a plant wilts, it's because the water vacuoles are no longer doing their part. They're not pushing from the inside. Okay? When they fill back up again, if you water that plant, it'll come right back. In fact, I have a video of that somewhere. Okay, questions on that part there? All right, so plant and animal cells, if we compare them side by side, obviously there's a lot of similarities, okay? They have mostly similar structures. The differences, however, are quite obvious, okay? That a plant cell typically has a very fixed shape, almost like a brick, okay? Whereas a plant or an animal cell's shape is flexible and always changing, okay? But they do both contain a nucleus. And they both contain Rough endoplasmic reticulum, that's this pink stuff with the blue dots. They both have that. Okay. They both have smooth endoplasmic reticulum. That's the pink stuff that's kind of all knotted up. Okay. Also right here in the plant cell. They both have a Golgi apparatus. That's this thing right here. There's one in the plant cell there. Okay. There's mitochondria. That's this sausage-shaped thing. It's got those in the plant cell as well. Okay. They're both filled up with a fluid called cytoplasm. Okay. Cytoplasm is the fluid that fills up all cells. We need our cells to be filled with fluid because that's how we transport things within our cells, is through these fluids. Okay. If it was filled with air, nothing would transport through it. Okay, it wouldn't work through the air. Plus, all the organelles would fall down to the bottom of the cell. Okay, so the fluid kind of holds everything up, but its most important job is that it helps to transport materials. Okay, you got food vacuoles in an animal cell. Okay, that would contain the organic materials they've consumed for food. You don't see those in a plant cell, but you do see a big water vacuole in a plant cell. You don't see that in an animal cell. We got these little things here called centrioles. Plant cells don't have those. Okay, so there are some differences, but for the most part, they're structurally very similar. And as I said before the other day, okay, it's not just the structural similarities, it's also the processes. They use the same processes to transport materials. Okay, use the same processes to make proteins, to copy DNA, okay, all of that kind of stuff. It's all very similar. Okay, all the processes are the same. Even when it comes down to breaking down the sugars, certainly how they get to their sugars is different, but after that, the process of releasing the energy from sugar is the same. Plant cells carry out cellular respiration just like animal cells do. Okay, it's just they made their own sugar, whereas animals had to go out and eat it. All right, is that sort of making sense? Okay, so from an evolutionary perspective, that means that they had a common ancestor that carried out all those processes, had all those structures. Okay, I want you guys to take a few minutes and answer those questions. While you're answering them, I'm going to hand out your cell diagrams, and we'll start going through those. So what's the main reason for differences between plant and animal cells? 3 words. Modes of nutrition. 3 words. Modes of nutrition. They get their sugar or their energy in different ways. Modes of nutrition. Okay. Number 2, what organelle supplies plants with energy and what process does it use? Chloroplasts?
And it mix, you have to have water to mix the cell walls stiff so it doesn't leak.
Well, that's actually just how it supports itself. What process does it use to make energy? Photosynthesis, right? Chloroplasts, photosynthesis, all we need for question number 2. Okay, what organelle supplies animal cells with energy and how does it do this? Keaton, what is it?
It's
Lysosome, yeah. And what does it do to the food?
changes it to energy.
Yeah, changes it to energy. Digests it, really. That's what digestion is. Okay, it's the chemical modification of food particles. Okay, number 4, transport within plant and animal cells is done in the same fashion. Why would this have been kept the same, evolutionarily speaking, when so many other things have been altered? All right, so this one, I wouldn't expect you to completely know the answer for this. So here's...
It's simple and efficient.
It's simple, it's efficient, okay, and from an evolutionary perspective, okay, here's how natural selection works. If something works, you survive, you pass on your genes, and your offspring have the same processes or the same traits. If something doesn't work, you either do not reproduce very much or at all, okay, or you die before reproduction occurs for you, which means you don't pass on your genes, and those genes are eliminated, and the traits that they would express are also eliminated. Since this stuff works and nothing better has come along, it's still present and it's still used. If there was some kind of mutation tomorrow, okay, that suddenly made the organism that had it transport materials way better than anything else, you would see that start to replace the current methods, over the next few thousand years probably. Okay? That's just how natural selection causes evolution. Okay? If something works, it's selected for, and pretty soon it replaces whatever was there before. Okay? Does that sort of make sense? Okay. All right, and then number 5, the nutritional needs of plants and animals are very different. Which would have survived best in a primordial Earth, that's a very young, early Earth, that had very little oxygen or organic material available? Okay. Would animals have survived, or chemoheterotrophs in general, would they survive if there's very little organic material or oxygen? They would not. Okay. They require oxygen and organic material in order to make energy. Plants, on the other hand, can make their own oxygen, and they can make their own glucose, their own organic material using photosynthesis. Okay. The first organisms in the fossil record are blue-green algae. Okay. That's photosynthetic, tiny microorganisms like bacteria, okay, that would have survived in the oceans of early Earth. Right? Okay, questions on any of those? Okay, take out your cell diagrams. And we'll start with the plant cell. Okay, a term that's on your diagram that's going to come up over and over again in this unit is this: eukaryotic. Okay. All the cells that we're going to look at are eukaryotic. That means they have a nucleus and other membrane-enclosed organelles. That'd be all the parts of the cell we're about to label. Okay. That's what it means to be eukaryotic. Eukaryotic cells can become specialized and are generally more efficient than prokaryotic cells. Prokaryotic cells are things like bacteria. Okay? They don't have a nucleus. They don't have membrane-enclosed organelles. Okay? They work quite a bit differently. Okay? So the term eukaryotic is something you're going to need to know. You should underline it. Okay? And its definition, or nucleus-containing cells. Okay? So plant cells are rectangular-shaped. Eukaryotic are nucleus-containing cells with a rigid cell wall. You don't have to have a cell wall to be eukaryotic. Just have the nucleus and other membrane-enclosed organelles. Okay? So on average, plant cells are between 10 and 100 micrometers long. The ones we're going to look at in the cell anatomy lab are going to be on the higher end of that range. Okay? They're going to be closer to 100, so we can actually easily see the different parts of the cell. Okay? Around the same size and diameter of a human hair. Unlike animal cells, plant cells make their own food through photosynthesis. We talked about that already. Okay? And that involves producing oxygen and glucose from water and carbon dioxide. All right, so let's get to the naming here. So I'm going to start at the top. What's this big purple thing? It's the nucleus. What does the nucleus do? Somewhere along the way, some very well-meaning science teacher told you, it's the brain of the cell. It's so not. I hate that. Okay? But somebody along the way told you that's what it is. A nucleus is not a brain. Okay? A brain is made of many cells and has active connections and synapses and all kinds of other things that the nucleus does not. Okay? If you want to make an analogy for the nucleus is a library. It is the library of the cell because it contains all of your genetic information. All of your DNA is stored in the nucleus. Okay? It stores the DNA of the organism. All right, within the nucleus is this darker dot. Okay? Usually near the center, but not always. There's a darker dot within the nucleus. That darker dot is called the nucleolus. If the nucleus is a library, the nucleolus is the librarian. The nucleolus knows where all the DNA is. Okay? When the cell needs something, let's say it needs to make some insulin, for example, okay? A chemical signal will be sent to the nucleus, and the nucleolus will recognize that it is a request for insulin. And it will find the part of your DNA that codes for how to make insulin, and it'll copy it. Okay? And it'll send that copy out into the cell where insulin can be made. It never sends your original DNA. Okay? So this is not a library that actually lends out the books. It copies the pages you want and sends out the copies. Okay? But that's essentially how your cell builds things. The nucleus finds the DNA and copies it, and then sends the copies out where proteins and whatever else can be built. Okay? So that's the job of the nucleolus, is essentially to copy DNA or monitor and control the synthesis of proteins. Okay? Now, the outside of the nucleus is called the nuclear membrane. Now, the nuclear membrane is a special kind of membrane. Okay? It's similar to the cell membrane, but also different. The nuclear membrane only allows DNA through. It'll allow it in, and it'll allow it out. But it won't let anything else in. That's how a virus can trick your cell, right? It injects its own DNA, and the nucleus goes, oh, that's supposed to be in here, pulls it in. Okay? So that's the only thing that can get in or out of the nuclear membrane, and it actually gets out not by moving through the membrane, but through these little pores. Okay? They're nuclear pores, and they can open and close. Okay? They're like little gates. They open, DNA goes in, or out, they close. Okay? Nothing else gets in or out. All right. This little line here looks like it's pointing at nothing, but it's actually pointing at that fluid I was telling you all cells are filled with, cytoplasm. Cytoplasm allows diffusion to occur. That's how things move through the cell. Okay. Next line down, okay, the one that's pointing at this kind of orangish brown stuff that's got the little turquoise dots on it. Okay, that stuff is called rough endoplasmic. Oh, sorry, my writing is terrible. Let me try that again. Rough endoplasmic reticulum, which you can mercifully abbreviate ER. Rough ER. Okay? That's what you can call it, but its real name is endoplasmic reticulum. Rough endoplasmic reticulum. Okay, the reason the rough endoplasmic reticulum is rough is because it's covered in little bumps called ribosomes. That's what this is pointing at, the little dots. Okay? Now, most of a cell's ribosomes are on the rough ER, but there are some that just float around in the cytoplasm. Ribosomes are what make protein. So they're the things that are going to take the instructions that the nucleolus sends out, and they're the ones that are going to look at the instructions and build whatever the instructions say. Okay? So they can make insulin, they can make adrenaline, testosterone, estrogen, thyroid stimulating hormone. Okay? They can make basically anything that's a protein, digestive enzymes or protein. They do that. That's what ribosomes do, is they make protein. The rough ER transports the proteins. Okay? Because it allows things to move very quickly from one place to another, as opposed to floating through the cell haphazardly, hoping it'll get where it's supposed to go. Okay, the next arrow is pointing at this stuff here. Looks a lot like this stuff, except it doesn't have any ribosomes on it. So by comparison, it is not rough, but smooth. Okay, this is the smooth ER. Something very few diagrams do well, including this one, is show just how much smooth ER there actually is. It fills up a lot of the cell. It doesn't show that here because it's hard to show just how much of it there is without obliterating everything else in the diagram. But your smooth ER, second to the nucleus, is probably the most important organelle. It has many, many jobs. Okay? It makes fats, lipids. Lipids are really important because it's what your membranes are made out of. So your cell membrane, your nuclear membrane, the membranes of all the organelles we're labeling, they're all made out of lipids. Okay? So lipids are really important, and the smooth ER makes them. The smooth ER also makes fat-soluble hormones. It can detoxify poisons. Okay? So if you have consumed or produced something that is toxic, and your body does that. It does produce things that are toxic, like lactic acid and stuff like that. Okay, that can be broken down in the smooth ER. Okay, if you consumed alcohol, it would be the smooth ER that would break it down. Nicotine, same thing, it breaks it down. Okay, so lots of the chemical substances that we would ingest and produce are broken down by the smooth ER. Okay, and it's important that it's broken down in there because it means it's trapped in there and it's not hurting anything else in the cell. They can also break down starch. So if you've just had a big plate of spaghetti or a big plate of rice, you've had a whole bunch of starch, okay? It's in the smooth ER that starch can be simplified into simpler sugars, okay? And that can then be burned by the mitochondria. Okay, there's questions as we go, guys. Don't be afraid to ask. Okay, the yellow thing, that is the Golgi apparatus. The Golgi apparatus also has a number of jobs. It can help produce digestive enzymes, but mostly it packages and processes waste for removal from the cell. And so waste products are delivered to the Golgi, and the Golgi gets rid of them. It is the sanitation technician, since we're not allowed to say garbage man, okay, of the cell. That's basically what it does. Okay? It gets rid of the cell's wastes. All right, this is the only diagram ever that I've seen where that structure is blue. Like,
I have this question that I feel like is pretty stupid, but
I'm sure it is.
how how does everything in the cell do this when it's like really, really tiny?
It does it on a really, really small scale. Would be the best answer I can give you, but a lot of these processes are very chemical in nature, or biochemical in nature. So they're basically just reactions that are housed in a certain place. Okay? The thing that makes a eukaryotic cell so efficient is it has separate structures for each job. So whatever conditions are necessary for packaging wastes, they're present in the Golgi. Whatever processes are best for burning sugars, they're present in the mitochondria. For a prokaryotic cell like a bacteria, which is much, much smaller, all of those processes have to happen in the same place. So it would be like washing your laundry in your dishwater after you've washed your dishes. Like, you're not doing a very good job of doing your laundry in dirty dishwater. Okay? But that's essentially what they have to do because they don't have separate environments to do everything. Does that sort of make sense? So yeah, all these processes that we're talking about are just basically reactions, but they need certain conditions to work well, and the organelles they're in provide those conditions. Okay, so the blue thing, which I've never seen blue ever before, but this diagram, okay, mitochondria. Okay, and somewhere along the way, some well-meaning science teacher told you that those are the powerhouse of the cell, which, yeah, it's just another one of those things. It's a very, you know, it's a perfectly valid explanation of what it does for a grade 5 kid. Okay. It carries out cellular respiration, that whole thing we talked about earlier, okay, where glucose gets burned in the presence of oxygen, makes carbon dioxide and water. That's what goes on in the mitochondria. So the mitochondria provide essentially the chemical energy that runs all of the cell's processes. So if you are, let's say, working out in the gym, okay, lifting some weights or doing some cardio or whatever, you get hot and sweaty. Well, the reason for that is when these are burning sugar, it releases a lot of heat. So you get hot. If you're running a fever because you get sick, these are running harder than normal. Okay, driving up your body temperature. Okay? Why do we get a fever, by the way? Why does your body do that? Because you feel lousy when you have a fever. Why does your body do it?
Is it to overheat and kill bacteria, or?
Yeah, it is. It's actually trying to make the conditions inhospitable to whatever organism is affecting you. Okay? Most bacteria, when they're in your body, want the conditions that are in your body, 37 degrees Celsius, okay, certain pHs and all that kind of stuff. If you raise your body temperature even a few degrees, they become a lot less efficient and are more easy to destroy or maybe die outright. So your body will, drive up your body temperature for a short period of time by a few degrees. If you run a really high fever for an extended period of time, that can be very bad for you as well, which is why we always keep an eye on a fever. If you're 37.2, 0.3, that's fine. You're a little sick. Okay? You're running 38 something, and we're starting to get concerned. We're giving you Tylenol and things like that. If you're running 39, you're going to cook yourself pretty soon. Okay? That's the kind of situation where they really want to get your fever down. They might even throw you in an ice bath or give you like an alcohol rub so that the alcohol evaporates and cools you off. Okay? Like stuff like that to try and bring your temperature down, because it's not healthy for you to have an elevated body temperature for a long period of time either. Okay? But it works good at getting rid of infectious organisms. All right. Okay. The layer that's inside of the green layer is the cell membrane. Okay, so a plant cell has a cell wall, but it has a cell membrane as well. Okay. Now, the cell membrane controls what gets in and out of the cell. It's not perfect, okay, but it generally allows the things the cell needs into the cell and the things that the cell wants to get rid of out of the cell. It's not infallible, okay? Sometimes bad stuff gets through it, okay? And sometimes good or bad stuff can't get out either, right? But it generally does a good job of controlling what gets in and out. We call that process endocytosis, that's movement into the cell, and exocytosis, that's movement out of the cell. The cell membrane controls that. Okay? It is what we call semi-permeable, which means some things can get through it and some things can't. Now, the cell wall, okay, present right here, you've probably been told somewhere along the way that the cell wall protects the cell. The cell wall does no such thing. The cell wall has no protective function whatsoever. In fact, the cell wall is basically like, if you've ever watched a house being built, when they first frame it, there's no, like you could walk through the walls because they haven't put the plywood on yet. The cell wall is like a framed house that's not walled in yet. Okay? So the frame is there, the frame can support the weight of the house, but it doesn't prevent anything from going in or out. You could walk right through it. Okay? That's what the cell wall is like. It's not even really a wall, it's more of a frame. Okay? And it just supports the cell's shape. It's permeable. Anything can get through it. Okay? It doesn't control what gets in and out at all. Okay? It serves zero protective function whatsoever. It is a frame, and a frame only. But it's strong. It can help support the shape of the cell. Yes. Okay. I scribbled that one out, so we don't have to worry about that because that shouldn't have been there. This green thing, though, we've talked about already, is a chloroplast. Okay? And obviously a chloroplast carries out photosynthesis, makes food for the cell. Shante, you look confused there for a second.
No.
Okay, you good? Okay. Okay, so chloroplast is pretty important. Only going to be in a plant cell, though you're not going to see it in the animal cell. All right, and our last two things here have to do with the water vacuole. So this arrow here is pointing at the outside of the water vacuole. The water vacuole has a special membrane called a tonoplast. Okay. It's a very strong membrane that holds that pressure. It's called turgor pressure, but essentially water pressure, okay, within the vacuole. And then we have the water vacuole. Okay, and again, oh, sorry, Shelby.
I have the animals.
On the back is the plant cell. Okay, so the water vacuole, you've probably been told somewhere along the way, it stores water for the cell. It is not a reservoir, okay, by any stretch of the imagination. Okay, its function is purely supportive. Okay? It pushes on the cell wall and keeps the cell wall rigid, which keeps the shape of the cell, which supports the shape of the plant overall. Okay? That is its job. Now, when the plant gets stressed for water, water is pulled from the water vacuole, but it's not putting it there to store it. Okay? It only actually comes out of there because it only comes out of there because of osmosis, something we haven't talked about yet, but because the salts build up around it, that actually sucks the water out. Okay? Same reason why you can't drink salt water. Okay? If you get stranded in the ocean, if you drink the ocean water, first off, that's gross. The ocean is the world's toilet. Okay? And secondly, don't drink salt water because the salt will dry you out. Okay? And that's what happens here. Okay. Questions on any of those?
What did you say was the function for the tonoplast?
The tonoplast is just a special membrane that encloses the water vacuole. We're going to go over all the functions of everything tomorrow, okay? And it's in your notes package, like detailed descriptions of what everything is doing. I'm just kind of giving an introduction to it today. All right, ready to move on to the animal cell? Okay, here's the good news. A lot of the structures are the same. So we don't have to talk about what they do twice because they do the same thing in both cells if they're there. So there's only a couple of things that are going to be new and different in the animal cell. So, same as before, we got the nucleus. Okay, which stores the cell's DNA. Now, for some reason, the nucleolus did not get labeled on this one. Okay, so we're just going to draw one of those arrows like I told you not to do out to here, okay, and call that the nucleolus. Okay, does the same thing as it did in the plant cell. It copies the DNA and sends it out so proteins can be synthesized. Okay, this arrow here is pointing at the fluid that fills up the cell and allows for diffusion to occur. That's cytoplasm. now we're hitting our first new structure. Okay, that's those two little yellow gear-shaped things. Okay, they are called centrioles. Okay. Centrioles help the cell when it's dividing. What they do is when the cell is about to divide, one centriole goes to each end of the cell. Okay? They will put out these fibers that will latch on to the DNA. When a cell is about to divide, all of your chromosomes line up at the middle of the cell. Okay? The centrioles send out essentially like little cables that grab onto the chromosomes. And they pull the chromosomes apart, making sure that the right amount of DNA ends up in each of the daughter cells. And then that actually becomes the nucleus, okay, of the new cell. Right? So they help with cell division is basically all you need to know. That's how they do it. Okay? Plant cells don't need those because plant cells' shape is not going to change at any point during division, but because an animal could be moving while the division process is going on, okay, that could mean that maybe the cell's shape radically changes and some of the DNA doesn't get to the right place. So the centrioles make sure that even if the cell's shape changes during division, all the DNA gets where it needs to go. All right, then we got the rough ER again, okay, that transports protein. Okay, what do we call the little turquoise dots that were on the rough ER? Ribosomes, right. Okay, and ribosomes make protein. All right, what are the little blue things? Mitochondria. Okay, they carry out cellular respiration. They break down sugar and release the energy from it. All right, another new structure. Okay, this structure here is a lysosome. Right, it's hard to tell, but there's food inside of it being digested. Okay, so this is a lysosome. Okay. And then this one here is pointing at the cell membrane, which does the same thing the cell membrane did in the plant cell. It controls endocytosis and exocytosis. Okay. Another new structure. Okay. This here is a peroxisome. Peroxisome is a precursor. That means it comes before a lysosome. So it's just a bubble that contains digestive enzymes. It has not merged with a food vacuole yet. So there's no food and thus no digestion occurring in the peroxisome. Okay, and then the yellow thing was the, oh, we got smoothie R here. Oh, it's not labeled, but we'll get to it. What's the yellow thing? Golgi Apparatus. Okay, and for some reason, there's no arrow coming off of this. So we'll make one. All right, that's our smooth ER. Okay, and for some reason, the nuclear membrane was also not labeled on here. So we'll give a little label for that too. Sorry, you're the first bunch to have the new diagram. I finally replaced the diagram I've been using for 20 years. All right, that's the cell. Tomorrow we're going to talk about what all the parts do. Okay.